Okay, guys, welcome back to another live stream. Of course, today we have a few interesting topics. Of course, I'm making my case for why Hedi Slimane should be the creative director of Gucci. We're going to be talking about Jacquemus working with L'Oreal, and we will also be talking about the effect of Trump's tariffs on the fashion industry. So, yeah, without further ado, I think let's jump straight into it so that we have these shorter intros. So let's just go straight into it at this point. One second. Is he saying that the audio is crunchy? One second. Let me listen. Let me listen back before we start to make sure my audio is pristine. One second. Also, I don't know if you got the right mic. Apparently, it's the right mic, but it's sounding like. Remember that time when it sounded like the audio is coming from my AirPods. Let's sort this out. One second. One second. One second. We can't have terrible audio, no way. Check your OBS setting if you're using it. So I'm not using OBS. I'm actually not using OBS. But I think I fixed it though. Listening to myself now, I think it's fixed. I think it's fixed. Let me know if I sorted it out, guys. Okay, cool. It sounds better. Okay, great, 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 great. Great. Okay, perfect. So let's jump straight into it. Okay, so let's start with this. So really, the first thing I'm doing in this stream is I'm making a case for why Hedi Slimane should be the creative director of Gucci. And this is not to say that he will go there or that he's the only option. However, I do think that he is one of the strongest options. So when it comes to Gucci, I think the first conversation we have to have is what went wrong, and then we go into why I think Hedi Slimane is the best option. So this whole issue with Gucci all started from Alessandro Michele's time at Gucci. Alessandro Michele made a ton of money from Gucci. I mean, I have a stat where Alessandro Michele took over from Frida Giannini in 2015, and at the time that he took over from Frida Giannini, the annual revenue of Gucci was 3.9 billion euros. By the end of 2015, the same year, sales were up by 5%, and the revenue in the last quarter was up 4.8% compared to the quarter before. And by the end of 2021, the sales were 9.7 billion euros. So basically, Alessandro Michele made a ton of money for the brand, loads. But because all of a sudden there was a luxury slowdown, and I think there are many different factors that led to Gucci having bad performance. I mean, there was COVID, there was an economic crisis, an energy crisis, so many things happened, right? And because they saw a downtick in revenue in not that long of a period when, Alessandro Michele was there, they tasked him with changing his aesthetic and changing his aesthetic to what can be seen as almost chasing trends and going with a more minimal look that was more akin to the trends of the time when we think of things like quiet luxury. And because Alessandro Michele didn't really feel like that was his aesthetic, that was not the direction he wanted to take the brand, he decided to, leave and not do that. So of course they installed someone who would do what they wanted, which in this case was Sabato De Sarno, and it didn't really work because I think Gucci were trying to channel a sort of return to minimalism and a certain aesthetic that's more associated with the time when Tom Ford was at Gucci. But I think what a lot of these companies miss is Gucci as a brand has always been a brand that was about exuberance. It's never been about this sort of mellow, demure thing that Sabato is going for. And that is regardless of the aesthetic. Because if you think of Tom Ford, what made Tom Ford, big and famous? It was the lifestyle of Tom Ford associated with the brand, right? It was the fact that he's a sexy man in sharp suits, part of this jet set lifestyle, people that go on private jets, they drink alcohol and have a fun time, sexy dresses. There was an allure that came with Tom Ford's Gucci, but part of it was actually, him as a person. Him as a person, people wanting to be like him, people like wanting to be part of his life. We don't even really know anything about Sabato De Sarno, so there's no way they could channel that same energy. I think sometimes what these companies and what these business people fail to forget is it's more than the clothing that makes these designers successful. It's the persona. It's many other things. And with Sabato, whether they wanted to, replicate the same aesthetic, they didn't channel any of the persona of Tom Ford. I mean, when you think of just even things that happen, like controversial things, like most of you will remember this fashion ad where the pubes were shaped like a Gucci G, right? It's things like this that builds the mystique of a designer, whether it's the controversy or just the larger than life personality that some of these creative directors have. So all in all, it was a total failure, and I don't really think it was Sabato De Sarno's complete fault, because once again, he was tasked with doing what the people at the top wanted to do. I just think that they had the wrong strategy from day one. They just didn't really know what they were doing, and they didn't really know the right direction to go in, to be honest. You also need to consider that Alessandro Michele's aesthetic is very much like thrifting meets extreme maximalism. And when you're going from that aesthetic to a complete 180 and you're going back to minimalism, you need the consumers to actually have time to get used to that aesthetic. How can you expect consumers that used to buy Alessandro Michele's clothing to overnight take to Sabato? It doesn't make sense. And they really thought in their minds that they could completely change the aesthetic, but keep Alessandro Michele's customers and build new customers. That doesn't even make any sense. That literally makes no sense. So realistically, the whole thing was just a complete disaster. And it was something that, I saw from the start that it wasn't going to work. Yeah, someone's saying Tom Ford's Gucci was coked up, sexed up, glammed up 70s disco. Yeah, exactly. And that's what I mean. This whole idea that Gucci is trying to be demure and all this sort of stuff. Tom Ford has never been that. Sorry, Gucci in general has never been that. Tom Ford was not that. Alessandro Michele was not that, just in two different ways. But Gucci is never subdued. And I think that's where they failed. Marketing-wise, it was never subdued. Branding-wise, aesthetic-wise. So I don't know what they were thinking. If Gucci is a brand that lacks house codes in the sense that so many different designers have done different aesthetics, but in terms of a house code, it has to have this level of exuberance to it. That's kind of what Gucci is. That's what it represents, especially in the modern day. So it's like they almost didn't know what Gucci represents, and they are the people that make the business decisions. A bit insane. So yeah, made no sense to me, and the writing was on the wall, at least in my opinion, from day one, to be very honest with you. And that brings us into Hedi Slimane. So to make my case as to why he is the best person, I think we first have to talk about his background in fashion, because I think it's very important. I also think he has a very strong background. So Hedi Slimane in the 90s was working as an assistant in fashion marketing at YSL. He then was installed by Pierre Bergé in 1996. You guys will probably know who Pierre Bergé is because he had a romantic relationship with Saint Laurent. And then when they stopped having that romantic relationship, they remained friends, and he remained the business brains behind the brand Saint Laurent and made a lot of the business decisions for Saint Laurent. So anyway, in 1996, Pierre Bergé made him the ready-to-wear director of men's collections at YSL. This is when Hedi Slimane became very famous for his very skinny, slim, rocker glam aesthetic that he's till today still famous for. So that was when he started building up some noise. He then left Saint Laurent. He rejected an offer actually at Jil Sander, so he could have actually been at Jil Sander. We could have seen an Hedi Slimane Jil Sander tenure, but it's something he turned down. He moved to Berlin. He had a residency for a few years before returning to fashion in 2000, and he became the creative director of Dior menswear. he continued building noise there. He did so many different things, continued to work on a skinny silhouette and made it a big thing in fashion, especially men's fashion, but a lot of women also wore a lot of his stuff. Was also, I think, the first menswear designer to receive a CFDA International Menswear Award, which is insane. And that was actually presented by David Bowie, which is cool because Hedi Slimane used to dress David Bowie for a lot of things, right? Then he left Dior. He eventually did return back to YSL, but this time not just doing menswear, doing both women's wear and menswear. In 2012, continued building noise there. And then, of course, more recently, he had a tenure at Celine, where he was from 2018 till last year. So he's built massive audience in fashion, and he's done so many different things. He also is quite infamous for when he goes to brands, he completely rebrands it. When he went to YSL, he changed the name to Saint Laurent. So we started going from calling it YSL to SLP, right? The same thing he did at Celine. He removed the accent or the accent, and made it Celine without the accent. So that is always kind of an infamous thing that he does. And at every single brand that he's been at, he has done amazingly well. He's made all the right decisions. He's made tons of money for every company he's been at. I mean, if we talk about Dior, for example, in 2004, he is very famous for creating La Collection Privée, and he designed the bottles and also did the advertising campaigns for the fragrances. The private line for Dior is one of the most successful fragrance private lines across the whole fashion industry. And I personally am a big fan of Dior Privé. At a point, I owned 12 fragrances from this line. I think now I have maybe 7, but I have some of them with me. So I have a Fève de Luce, if you guys can see it. Let me make it big. So I've got this, Fève de Luce. The light's a bit much, but this is Fève de Luce. I've got Vanilla Diorama. I've got Ambre Nuit. Let's see if I can hold all of these at once. I've got Eden Rock. I've got, can I still hold it? I've got Spice Blend. Okay, I can't hold all of these. Let me show you the other two I have. I've got Gris Dior and I've got Oud Ispahan. So I'm a big fan of these fragrances. I'm also quite knowledgeable about the whole line because I buy a lot of it. So people buy this line. Like, it's very, very successful. And he, of course, was the person that really pushed this line forward. And then talking about fragrances once again, in 2005, just after he launched the Privé collection in 2004, he created, with Olivier Polge, one of the most famous Dior fragrances, which is Dior Homme. And it's sort of like a masculine version of Iris. I actually own Dior Homme Intense, which is a fragrance that came out, I believe in 2011. But this is like supposedly a more intense version. It doesn't smell exactly the same, but it's really good. Like this beautiful Iris, fantastic. So when it comes to fragrances, he knows what he's doing. He really, really knows what he's doing when it comes to fragrances. And that, to me, is one of Kering's weak points. Serious, like severe weak points when it comes to Kering and their brands. Of course, he's famous for a lot of other things. When you think of, this is Dior Homme for people that don't know what it looks like, but when you also think of the likes of other famous products that he created for men, the first thing that comes to mind, especially at YSL, are the Wyatt boots. Hedi Slimane had men dressing like rockers. He had men wearing Wyatt boots. So many people wore this at one point. It's not really as big now. I don't really see too many people wearing Wyatt boots as much anymore, but there was a point in time, like if you look here, you have Ye wearing them. You've got Harry Styles wearing them. Like everyone was wearing these boots. Like everyone. Like Miguel, every single person was wearing these boots. Like you literally could not like miss these boots at one point in fashion. So he's famous for that. He's also famous, of course, for making his luxurious teddy bombers. So he, to be honest, single-handedly changed the face of menswear and changed the whole direction of menswear at the time. And at Celine, I think he did that, but not to the same extent as when he was at YSL and Dior, to be very honest. So Hedi Slimane just knows how to make products that sell and are desirable by many people, both women and men. He's just good at that. Every brand he's at, he makes so much money for the companies. It's insane. Like, I even have a stat from him at Celine. So when he was at Celine, during his tenure, revenue doubled to almost 2.5 billion euros, which is absolutely insane. And you need to add the context of when he was at Celine. When he was at Celine, right, he did not care about the fashion press. And I've talked about this before, but the reason why is because he's really good friends with, of course, the Vogue Paris editor, former editor Emmanuel Alt. And when Vogue and Anna Wintour was doing all these Condé Nast restructurings, they got rid of her role, and Hedi Slimane was quite angry about it. So he stopped working with Vogue when he was at Celine. So Celine, you'll notice that on Vogue Runway, you don't really see a lot of the runway shows anymore. If you actually have a look, it's because of Hedi Slimane. He didn't, advertise with a lot of magazines. He didn't care about them going to his shows. He didn't care about influencers going to his shows. There was even a point in time when he wasn't even doing shows. He was just spending millions on these highly produced runway videos and campaign videos. And yet, revenue still doubled. So you're telling me that, all these brands are struggling and all of them are clamoring and trying to work with everyone. And Hedi Slimane literally is like, I don't care to work with any of these fashion publications, and revenue doubles. Like, he boycotted basically the biggest fashion magazine in the whole industry, and revenue still doubled. So if we're talking about who knows how to make money, who knows how to brand a company, and who knows how to push it forward, there's only one name, and his name is Hedi Slimane. However, all of this being said, there are still going to be some problems that arise. And of course, Hedi Slimane, even when he was at Celine more recently, part of the reason why they did so well, they got the branding correct. He worked with Lisa from Blackpink. She became essentially the face of the brand. And, outside the runway shows, you'd see people screaming all the time, oh my God, Lisa! You always see these people screaming. If you watch Loic Prigent's videos, people go absolutely crazy. But this was a very, very strong and good marketing move from the brand. Very, very smart. The fragrance line, sensational. The beauty line, absolutely sensational. I mean, I have, once again, talking about like all these kind of things, right? I have Celine candles. And I love these Celine candles. The branding, the way that the packaging is, the way it's shaped, the fact that the wax is black in line with the actual case. It's sensational. I'm telling you, everything he does from a branding perspective is so good. It's honestly so good. But moving forward anyway, like I was going to say earlier, problems can arise with working with Hedi Slimane because Hedi Slimane is very difficult to work with. When he was at Celine, I remember this article came out in BOF where they were talking about how working with Hedi Slimane can be really difficult because he has his house in Saint-Tropez and he spends countless hours and company funds, ferrying samples back and forth between Paris and Saint-Tropez. And he'll look at a lot of projects. Projects will reach a certain stage. People work really hard on these projects. Then somewhere along the line, he'll just axe the project and be like, actually, I don't really want to do that. And then people's hard work essentially goes to waste. And then that's the end of it. And then, they have to do something else and have to work on a new project. So that really hurts a lot of people's self-esteem. But, a case could be made that that's actually a good thing. Because Hedi Slimane's aesthetic and his, branding is so strong that he knows exactly what he wants. And he can almost tell if something will work or not. And we have proof of that because the numbers don't lie when it comes to Hedi Slimane. He's always making money for brands. So the numbers don't lie. He doubled the revenue when he was at Celine. So whatever decisions he's making, clearly they work. Clearly they work. But another issue, of course, is royalties. Hedi Slimane is notorious for, one, having an extremely high salary. Secondly, he demands insane royalties for everything, whether that's formulations for fragrances to marketing campaigns to photography deals and all those kind of things. He demands royalties on absolutely everything. And, brands that are trying to cut corners, they might not want him there because they're like, oh, he's just too expensive. He just costs too much. But do you want to spend a lot of money and make more money, or do you want to be penny wise and pound foolish? That's up to these companies to decide, right? Of course, like I mentioned before, another issue is if he goes to Gucci, do they want to put up with the fact that he might boycott any magazine and it's really random with him? He might ban certain journalists from coming to the shows. And how exactly will that affect the business side of Gucci long term? That might be something that they might struggle with and they might think is like a really big issue. He's also like a control freak. I am a fan that he's a control freak, but I can understand from a company perspective why they won't like that, because companies like to control their employees, right? But Hedi Slimane is very notorious for wanting control over everything, not just the clothing and what goes into the collections. Like most creative directors, it's, when are they created? How are they shown? When are they shown? That's why at Celine, their runway shows will just come out randomly. They'll just post videos randomly. There was no sort of science to it. Like, you wouldn't really know. But they still made more money. So despite all of those unorthodox ways of doing things, they still made big profits. So clearly he knows what he's doing once again. But he sometimes does the photography himself. I remember when he first went to Celine, how he removed everything that represented the past Celine. And he made the photography black and white and all that sort of stuff. And all the Phoebe Philo fans were mad. And they're like, this is not the real Celine. Celine is not supposed to look like this and all of that. And he just doesn't care. He really doesn't care. He just puts his own spin on everything from his perspective. But a question needs to be asked around whether these companies are okay with that and, whether they want that. Also, a big thing we need to mention is the lawsuit between Hedi Slimane and Kering, because, of course, this is a big thing that I've seen people saying, there's no way he's going to go to Gucci because he had a lawsuit. Most of these people, I don't think, actually know anything about the lawsuit or why the lawsuit happened or what exactly the details were. So we are going to read it via fashion law and see exactly what was the root cause for Hedi Slimane suing Kering twice. So let's read through it. So it says, in a preliminary hearing in July 2016, a French labor court determined that Kering was on the wrong side of the law and that it owed Slimane the $30 million, likely a result of the fact that, in accordance with French law, an employer cannot unilaterally waive a non-compete obligation unless the clause provides so. So, let me just explain that. Essentially, what happened was, when Hedi Slimane left YSL, he had a non-compete in his contract, which is normal, right? Normally, when you work at LVMH, you have a non-compete, which means that you have to wait a certain time period before you can go to a competitor, well, a brand from a competitor company like a Kering brand, or vice versa. So this is nothing new. Now, as part of Hedi Slimane's non-compete, he had a stipulation in his contract that meant that as part of his non-compete, he was supposed to be paid a certain number of millions of dollars, right? Now, Kering thought they were slick and sly and decided to waive that non-compete clause so they don't have to pay him. So they were like, you can go to any brand you want. We don't mind. We've removed the non-compete. And Hedi Slimane's like, hold on a minute. In our contract, the non-compete means that you're supposed to pay me a certain amount for me to, enact this non-compete. So essentially what you're doing is, by removing this non-compete, you're just not going to pay me the money that you're supposed to pay me as part of the non-compete. So of course he sued them and he won both times, which means that the court of law found that what Kering was doing was not legally right. Otherwise, he would not win in a court of law, especially not against a massive company like Kering. Kering has way more resources than Hedi Slimane. They probably have a better, legal team than Hedi Slimane, the individual. So you cannot tell me that Kering was not in the wrong there. They were literally shown to be in the wrong twice in the court of law, and Hedi Slimane won all that money. So why I don't think this is as big as an issue as people are making it out to be is because if you really think about it, Kering shouldn't have an issue with Hedi Slimane personally because they were the ones that were trying to be shady. they shouldn't have an issue with the fact that he sued them twice, because they were trying to just not pay him money, and he got the money that he rightfully deserved. So I don't think it should be an issue. And Kering and Gucci specifically are not in any position to be, especially financially, businesses where you're supposed to leave your emotions on the table. You're not really supposed to bring loads of emotions to business, because that's how you go out of business, being too emotional about things. So to be honest, they played themselves, and if they know what's good for them, they should forget about that whole saga, accept that they were in the wrong, and move forward. So that whole lawsuit shouldn't be an issue. It really, really shouldn't be an issue, because it's their fault. They were the ones trying to, cheat him out of his money, and he rightfully won. So I've seen a lot of people online saying there's no way he could go back because of the lawsuit and all of that. But I don't think and in all the people that have had those takes, no one has actually mentioned the actual specifics of the lawsuits. Like why exactly he won, why exactly he sued them. They're just making it seem like he's just some problematic person that had a crazy fight with Kering and they could never forgive him because of all this stuff, right? But the next man makes a strong point. Would you work for a company that tried to screw you twice? I think it depends, because he won twice. So he knows if they try to do any crazy stuff, he just needs to take them to court and he's probably going to win. Especially if something is literally in the contract and they try to remove it from the contract without his permission. That is literally not... that just doesn't make any sense, right? So that's the crazy thing. And another big reason why that I was thinking about when I was like, oh, they really need Hedi Slimane to really do some stuff at Gucci is this story. I think more so than anything, this is one of the most important stories when it comes to Kering. The fact that, in 2023, Kering invested a lot of money in their beauty division. Now, why is this important? Most of Kering's big brands and their big fragrance lines are licensed to other big companies, whether that's L'Oreal. In the case of Gucci, Coty owns the rights and of the license to sell Gucci fragrances, right? Now, it makes sense why they have these deals in place, because to be honest, the fragrance game is really expensive. Like the initial investment that it takes to push your fragrances to the level of a Gucci would cost a lot of money. The initial investment would be insane in marketing, in formulation, in all this stuff. And so having the infrastructure to do all these things is super expensive. However, I'm so shocked that it took Kering until 2023 to really launch their beauty division. That doesn't make any sense to me, because Kering is such a big company. If it was a smaller company, I would understand. Like, it makes sense, and we're going to talk about it, why Jacquemus, has an investment from L'Oreal. That makes sense, because Jacquemus does not have the resources to do it themselves. They don't. But Kering does. And so this is why Kering is now understanding, if we vertically integrate our fragrance game, not only do we have control over the way it's marketed, not only do we have control over the way it looks, who creates them, we can also make maximum profits because we touch everything. So we touch every single part of the supply chain. So they are late on this, to be honest, very, very late. And now they are kind of in trouble because, yes, they are, building these fragrances one by one and really fixing their beauty products, but they still have all these licensing deals that they really can't really get out of. Like, I did some research, and their Coty deal, the earliest it expires is in 2028, which is a while from now. So they're in trouble, at least in the short term. And of course, when it comes to these initial investments into the beauty industry, you need to also remember that Kering's strategy, and we've seen from the way that Gucci has really suffered, they think too short term, way too short term. And the issue with that is they never make long-term decisions that make sense over the long term, even if you suffer in the short term. So a smart thing to do over the long term is invest heavily in fragrances, really pump money into your beauty division, and then 5 years from now, you reap the benefits. But in the short term, you might make a loss because you invested so much into the beauty division, right? So unfortunately, because Kering is always about short-term investors, stock prices, because they care about that crap all the time in the short term, they haven't, and this is why they're so late on the beauty division, and now they're kind of stuck. Because yes, they're going to build their beauty division, and clearly you can see the intent there. The former Estee Lauder executive, Raffaella Cornegia, is the CEO of Kering Beauty, right? So they're hiring the right people. They have their eye on the ball, but it's kind of too late. It's really too late. And I don't even know how exactly they plan to wiggle out of these contracts close to the end, because some of these contracts might be hard to wiggle out of. So we'll see how that happens. But when it comes to beauty, like I've shown you guys, Hedi Slimane is the man for the job. And if they really want to get their beauty division off the ground, they need the likes of Hedi Slimane to really add that pizzazz and that spice to it, that people, to make fragrances that people actually want to buy. Because to be honest, Kering, across most of their brands, their beauty division is weak. Like compared to LVMH, their beauty division is quite terrible actually. All their brands, whether we're talking about McQueen, YSL is a brand that, you know, has a really strong fragrance line, but then they don't own the rights to sell their fragrances. It's licensed out. So there goes that one. Gucci, it's licensed out, and Gucci fragrances are not even that good anyway. People don't really care. Like people in the fragrance game, like people in the fragrance world, do not care about Gucci fragrances, I'm going to be honest. Yes, YSL Beauty does print money, but not via Kering though. I mean, Kering, obviously with these licensing deals, it's not like Kering doesn't see any of the money. They get a certain percentage of the profits. However, if they own the rights, they would make even more profit. So there's that. And a lot of their other brands like McQueen, fragrance line is limited. Balenciaga, the fragrance line is limited. So they're just in a really, really bad spot when it comes to their fragrance lines. And I just think a lot of work needs to be done there. Honestly, a lot of work really, really needs to be done there. Bigger companies tend to be much slower to respond to market demands, at least outside of fashion. Not very surprising for a bureaucratic organization. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, Dior has a sensational fragrance line. I mean, I buy a lot of Dior fragrances, but Dior is LVMH, right? It's not Kering. So that's my point. Like LVMH has a really strong fragrance line, and they know what they're doing. And when you look at what Kering is doing, like launching their beauty division in 2023, how late is that? And I remember after they launched their beauty division, that shortly after was when they acquired Creed. So yeah, the Bottega Veneta releases are still new to the game. And I haven't really seen, when it comes to the Bottega Veneta fragrances, I like the bottles. They're kind of unique, but I just think the marketing was weak. People aren't really, I genuinely don't think people are going to be talking about the Bottega fragrances in a few years. Like the vibe I'm getting, I don't see people talking about them. The people in the fragrance community aren't really talking about the Bottega Veneta fragrances the same way that they talk about what Hedi Slimane does. Like the Privé line, people in the fragrance community are always talking about that. The Celine stuff that Hedi Slimane does, that did in the past, so many people in the fragrance community talk about that. Like Black Tie, Reptile, Parade, Celine Parade. People always talk about that stuff. So I just don't really think the Bottega fragrance line is moving the needle. Of course it's new, but I just think the way they marketed it was also really, really weak. So once again, it just seems like they don't really know what they're doing when it comes to the beauty division. And they're so late to the whole thing. So that's one of the huge reasons why they need Hedi Slimane. Like a really big reason why they need him. So yeah, thank you very much, guys, for coming to my TED Talk. I have made my case for why I think Hedi Slimane is the man for the job. I don't really think necessarily he will go there. I just think that he should go there, and they should really consider him if they are not. Of course, there are loads of other options to go to Gucci. You have Pierpaolo Piccioli, who some people have said that, you know, he's a lock for Fendi. People have basically made it seem like he's basically at Fendi already. So there's that. You have J.W. Anderson, who people are saying that he's going to Dior. We'll see about that, but I guess Gucci could now be another option. But I guess the only issue with that is him being at Loewe means that there's a non-compete. So could he go to a Kering brand very quickly? Probably not. You have the likes of Kim Jones. He had massive success at Dior. I mean, he is very good at making products that sell. I think my only issue with Kim Jones is that I think he designs really good menswear and he has a proven track record that his menswear sells. However, Kim Jones, I mean, when it comes to women's wear and his time at Fendi, his short time at Fendi showed that. I don't really think he can move the needle when it comes to women's wear. So I don't really know how that would work at Gucci. So there's that. And then also Kim Jones was at Dior, so non-compete once again. You have the likes of Riccardo Tisci, who was at Burberry not too long ago. Could he, go to Gucci and do some stuff there? You have the likes of Daniel Lee. People are saying that, he's going to go from Burberry to a few other brands. Some people are saying Jill Sander. So you have that. You also have the likes of John Galliano, who was just at Margiela, left shortly. People are saying that he's going to start his eponymous label. Is there a chance that he could go to Gucci and, make some noise at Gucci? I think the only issue with John Galliano is that John Galliano is a sensational designer, but a lot of his stuff doesn't sell. And with John Galliano, for him to work at a brand, you need really savvy business people that can help channel his creativity into products that sell. So that's why Dior was a match made in heaven, because you had him making like the Dior saddlebags and, all these things that went on to really sell big numbers. But at Kering, their business decisions are all out of whack. So you add John Galliano with his aesthetic, and I just don't think it would work commercially. I don't think it would do well financially. So there's that. I've also seen a lot of people talk about Maria Grazia Chiuri. People, of course, have said that she is leaving. And there's a rumor that literally she has a buyout. She's being bought out from Dior. I don't know if that's true or not. That's a rumor. Could she go to Gucci? I mean, she does sell. She sells really well. So a conversation can be had there with Maria Grazia Chiuri going to Gucci, but also non-compete. She's at Dior. Dior's under LVMH. Gucci is a Kering brand. So there's all of that, but those are all the other options from the top of my head that could work at Gucci. So there are many other options, but I definitely think that Hedi Slimane is definitely a name that, should be at the forefront of the conversation when it comes to who should go at Gucci. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in terms of what I just said about Hedi Slimane and if you think he would work there. And then we'll go to the next topic. Let me open the chat, see what you guys are talking about. See if you guys agree or disagree with my takes. Let's see. Okay, Fabio from Prada. Okay, that's interesting. I haven't seen any of those conversations. They should start trading designers like footballers at this point. That's funny. Did someone say Kanye should go to Margiela? After Kanye's, I mean, he's already shown to be really problematic, but after Kanye's craziness in recent times on Twitter, I think let's just leave Kanye to be Kanye on his own. But yeah, this whole musical chairs where everyone is going everywhere has been a bit insane, especially in recent times. Riccardo Tisci does have that default Gucci type of aesthetic, Fairs. Not what? Riccardo Tisci is just concerned with taking pictures of Irina Shayk. That's crazy. That's insane. Okay, I guess people in the chat. Okay, no one else has something. Also, by the way, thank you very much for the super chat, Bruno. I really, really appreciate it. I really, really do. But yeah, shout out to Hedi Slimane. I am critical of Hedi Slimane a lot of times, but I do think that a lot of what he touches turns to gold, and that's why I'm a customer of Hedi Slimane, and I don't buy a lot of luxury stuff like at all. But for some reason, the luxury stuff that I do buy, most of it has some connection to Hedi Slimane in one way or another. Especially when it comes to beauty products like fragrances and candles and diffusers and stuff. So yeah. But yeah, let's move on. Let's talk about Jacquemus. Let's talk about Jacquemus. So next story, This is really interesting because we're talking about fragrances, and the fragrance world is moving really fast. The beauty industry at this point is moving super, super fast. It's hard to keep up with all these things that are happening, from the investment of the row to now we're talking about Jacquemus. So L'Oreal invested in Jacquemus. Jacquemus inked a beauty deal. So, as it says, the cosmetics giant has taken a minority stake in the buzzy French brand as part of a long-term beauty partnership. So, Jacquemus is moving into beauty with backing from one of the industry's biggest players. French cosmetics giant L'Oreal has taken a minority stake in the buzzy French brand, underpinning a long-term beauty partnership announced Friday. The financial terms of the deal were not disclosed. Jacquemus' charismatic founder and designer Simon Jacquemus has carefully guarded his brand's independence since founding in 2009, but flagged last year that he was looking for a minority investor to help the label grow. Now to pause there, that conversation was really big because there was a conversation around when his stores launched that they kind of launched them too early, and there was an issue with the financial side of it, and they were really looking for an investor to take the brand to the next level, to open more stores in key markets and do things of the sort. So this is a conversation that around Jacquemus we've been having for a while, and of course L'Oreal came in and became the company that brought in that investment. Jacquemus is one of fashion's best known names, especially among young Gen Z consumers. The brand grew steadily in the wake of the pandemic, with sales exceeding 270 million euros in 2023, which is huge for an independent brand like Jacquemus, like enormous. But in an increasingly choppy luxury market dominated by conglomerates, the designer felt a deep-pocketed backer was needed to push the business to the next level. Yeah, so in 2023, they did have really good financial performance. Like they said, 270 million euros in sales. That being said, a conversation was had, and I need to see the financials on this, that last year in 2024, it was a bit of a tough year. Not tough in terms of like they made no money, but tough in terms of they had goals of getting closer and closer and closer to being $1 billion brand. And last year, they didn't really make any or much progress in going further in that goal. So they had a lot of issues last year, which is why the conversation came in like, okay, we're going to need an investor now. We're now at the point where we need an investor. Otherwise, it's showing that we can't really grow any further or to the rate that we want to grow without an investment from a big company. So that's why the investment came. But anyway, reading on. I value my independence. I want to pass down this company to my children, but I have to break through the glass ceiling by finding the right partner, Jacquemus told French newspaper Le Figaro in October. A push into beauty has been long awaited. In 2021, Spanish fragrance and fashion house Puig took a 10% stake in the company with a view to launch a beauty line. The plan was later aborted and Jacquemus repurchased the stake the following year. Now that point is really, really interesting because, I mean, when you think of the company Puig, they specialize in fragrances, right? That's their whole thing. You think of, even on their website, they talk about it. Puig registers double-digit growth and recorded revenues of 4.79 billion euros in 2024. So they make a lot of money. When a lot of luxury companies are, declining, a lot of them are, yes, that is how you pronounce it. It's Puig. That's how you pronounce it. But anyway, when a lot of other luxury conglomerates are declining, they are seeing a lot of good sales and they are really, really, doing really well in this industry that a lot of other conglomerates are suffering in. Now, if you look at the kind of brands that they own, just look at what Puig owns, right? You can see it on the screen. They own Dries Van Noten, Carolina Herrera, Byredo, Nina Ricci, Rabanne, now Jean-Paul Gaultier. Now, if you look at these companies, one thing that you can tell is that they know how to do a fragrance line because it's their background, right? Fragrances. Carolina Herrera makes loads of money via fragrances. I mean, Rabanne, I don't need to tell you. Everyone knows the Rabanne fragrance line. Jean-Paul Gaultier, I don't need to tell you. Everyone knows about the Jean-Paul Gaultier fragrance lines. Of course, they They have Byredo that they've been pushing forward. It's become one of the really, really big companies as far as fragrances go. Dries Van Noten, their fragrance line is not that old, but the company really helped push their fragrance line, and it's slowly becoming a very big fragrance line because the bottles are interesting, the branding is interesting. It makes sense in the case of Dries Van Noten as a person, the fact that he loves flowers and has a flower garden and all this sort of stuff, and they're using very unique floral notes in the fragrances, so it makes sense in the realm of Dries Van Noten. You have the likes of Nina Ricci, strong fragrance line once again. So they are good at this. I think the only weakness about the company as a whole is that it seems, if you look at a lot of the companies that they own, that when they take over these luxury brands, they kind of discard the clothing and just focus on the fragrances. So the clothing kind of becomes an afterthought, but then they make loads of money via the fragrances. So if you look at, once again, all these brands one by one, Dries, they haven't had Dries for long enough to really decimate the clothing yet, but let's see what they do. But Jean Paul Gaultier, the clothing, apart from the couture shows, which for the most part doesn't sell like that, the clothing is really an afterthought. Most of the money comes from the fragrances. You think of Nina Ricci, people don't really think of Nina Ricci clothing anymore, even though they've had some interesting tenures, whether that's from, Botta to the likes of, was it Harris Reed that was at Nina Ricci? So they've had designers there that have brought interest to the brand, but it hasn't really caught on. But in terms of fragrances, they make loads of money. The same thing can be said about Rabanne. Rabanne is basically at this point seen, even though it still is a fashion brand, it's just seen as a fragrance line at this point. Some people don't even know that they make clothes. So that's, I think, a big issue with this company. They kind of just discard the clothing and they're just like, yeah, we're going to make you a massive beauty company. So it's interesting, going back to Jacquemus, that they initially took a 10% stake and then he bought the stake back. I wonder what his thought process was for buying that stake back. Like, why is that? Did he think that when he had conversations with them, they were just going to throw away the clothing and just focus on beauty, and he didn't really like that? That could be a big reason if you look at the history of the company. But moving on, it says, L'Oreal's investment comes at a pivotal time for the brand as it seeks to sustain momentum in a challenging luxury market. The company opened a flurry of new stores in New York, London, and LA last year, its first international doors. Alongside the retail push, it has pursued an elevation strategy, increasing prices and switching much of its production to Italy. For its part, L'Oreal is doubling down on prestige beauty. This week, it also took a minority stake in Armani luxury fragrance house Amouage, which is a big luxury fragrance house, by the way, like huge, picking up. So one of the biggest, like, quote unquote niche houses in fragrances right now. But anyway, reading on, the Jacquemus beauty line will be housed under L'Oreal's Luxe division, alongside products under license from the likes of YSL, Prada, and Valentino brands. L'Oreal also owns the fashion house Mugler, which it purchased from French beauty company Clarins in 2020. In a statement from L'Oreal's president of Luxe said, Jacquemus has outstanding luxury beauty potential, calling out its singular brand positioning, creativity, and social media savvy. So now let's discuss. This is all very interesting. Of course, I alluded to earlier when I was talking about the likes of Kering and their beauty division and all that sort of stuff, because of course L'Oreal owns the license to sell YSL fragrances, right? But in the case of Jacquemus, they do not have the resources to launch their own fragrance line in mass, the way that Kering would with their beauty division, or LVMH or L'Oreal or Estée Lauder. They just don't. So they do have to work with a big company. This is if they want to make serious money through their beauty line. They do need to work with a L'Oreal or the sort. So I think from a business standpoint, this is an amazing move from Jacquemus. I mean, of course, they wanted to be independent, and they are independent in the sense that, they still have an independent majority stake, but slowly we're going to see them work more and more with a lot of these big companies to scale, because that's the only way they can really go to, the $1 billion company. I think that of all these independent companies, Jacquemus is one of the most on-brand companies to have a fragrance line. If you think of when we think about Jacquemus, outside of, the clothing, we think of well, not the fragrances, because it doesn't exist, but we think of like the south of France. We think of by the beach. Jacquemus has all these pop-up cafes that they do all over the world, including in France, right? This is a pop-up that they did in Seoul in Korea. So they always have these like experiences, and luxury is moving more into luxury experiences because people less and less are buying luxury in the form of clothing, and they're buying luxury in the form of experiences. That's why a lot of these luxury conglomerates are investing in hotels. They are investing in, other luxury experience, yachting, all these kind of things, right? So Jacquemus fits perfectly. That is kind of part of the brand. That's kind of what the brand represents. So when you think of the fragrance, I think of, a very light floral, citrusy, nice fragrance for the summer in the hot weather by the beach. That's kind of the vibe of the Jacquemus fragrance, and it works. I think it makes all the sense in the world, and this is why I think, yes, Jacquemus clothing to me is not one of the standouts across the fashion industry, but if we talk about marketing, we talk about business, Jacquemus, and I think a lot of independent brands need to look at Jacquemus and study the brand as a case study, because he makes really, really, really good business decisions, and consistently too. And this is just another one of those. And to go on his Instagram, he made a statement via his Instagram page. So I just want to read that quickly. So he said, 15 years ago, I began dreaming of and creating Jacquemus, with perfume and beauty always part of my vision for the brand. Today, I am proud to celebrate another milestone for the maison we have built together over the years. Merci L'Oréal. I don't know what that means. Lux de créer un ce magnifique projet. French people can translate that for me. But he said, this is just the beginning, Simone. So clearly he's happy about it. They're going to go hard and tough and strong into the beauty division. And I think it's going to work. I think it's going to sell really well. I think it's going to do really, really well. Someone say, to be honest, one of the good business decisions is him being hot. Yeah, but why not lean into it? Like, I always tell people, like, if you're an attractive person, then you should take advantage of it, because it's an advantage you have over other people. Going back to the conversation we were having around Gucci, in Gucci, when we talk about Tom Ford's era, part of the allure of Tom Ford is how handsome he is and how attractive people found him. That was part of the allure of his time at Gucci, right? And so when Gucci thought they could replicate his success just with an aesthetic that didn't even channel Tom Ford really, and didn't really look like Tom Ford's clothing anyway, it just wasn't going to work, because there are so many factors at play. But why not do that? I think if I looked like Chris Hemsworth, I would lean into it for sure. Like, I'll probably have 1 million subscribers if I look like Chris Hemsworth. So why not lean into it? Why not? I think it's best. Life isn't fair. However, everyone has something that they're particularly good at, and I think you should lean into it. And if what you're good at is just naturally looking good, I think lean into it. So I think, yes, that's part of the success of Jacquemus. That's why, lots of people are obsessed with him, and by extension, the brand. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. He can't control that. He looks the way he looks. I mean, I don't support or not support pretty privilege. It's just a thing that exists. I think we just have to accept it. It's just what happens, you know what I mean? So yeah, that's just life, to be honest. That's just how life is. But yeah, you guys, I want to know, what do you guys think about Jacquemus and his fragrance line? Do you think it would work? Obviously, I think it's a good idea, so that's not really a question to ask, but what do you think the fragrance will smell like? And what do you think that first marketing campaign is going to look like? What do you think he's going to be doing with that first marketing campaign? You guys don't know how hard it is to be beautiful. Lavender everywhere. that would be very on brand, especially because they had that runway show with the lavender field, right? So imagine their first fragrance is just lavender heavy. That would make so much sense. Jacquemus linking with L'Oreal makes sense for his brand more than Puig does, as he does not fit into the Puig catalog. Yeah. But then again, they would just make the fragrances work because they know what they're doing when it comes to the fragrances. But I think what they would do is they would kind of destroy the whole lifestyle and branding and marketing of the company in favor of selling fragrances. So if his goal is just to make loads of money and set into the sunset, then it would be a good move. And obviously that's not what he wants to do, which is why he bought his stake back. I think it was a 10% stake we read. So... and that shows, this is once again why Jacquemus always wins, and I'll always praise him from this perspective, because he had the foresight to be like, it doesn't work with the brand, I'm going to buy the stake back. How many people do you know do that? Like, how many designers do you know do that? Like, in the short term, just they're like, okay, let me buy the stake back because I don't think it works long term. And this is why Jacquemus does well financially too, because this is a critique I had for Kering. You cannot make short-term decisions for a company and just expect to keep growing all the time. At some point, there are decisions you have to make that might affect you in the interim, because I can imagine buying that 10% stake back was really expensive. And by then, the company would have been worth more. So he would have spent a lot of money and, had to just spend that money in the short term. But now in the long term, look at them. Look at the position that Jacquemus is in the long term. Look at them. Look at how much money they make in revenue. And they're about to make way more with L'Oreal now. So that's my issue with conglomerates like Kering, which is why I always critique the way they do business, because they're so like, the next quarter, we need to move forward. We need to make more money in the next quarter. And it's like, you can't run a business like that sustainably. It's not sustainable to just think that every quarter you can grow and you're not even making decisions like really honing in on your business division and really trying to wiggle your way out of all the licensing deals that you're in, and just, losing money in the short term, but spending money on the infrastructure, and then in the long term, really making loads of money. They're just, until they realize that, it's just not going to get better. Until they realize it just won't improve. So yeah, I don't know why it's hard for them to understand that, to be honest. If they want to watch my stream, if you're on the Kering team and you're watching this, make long-term decisions and focus on your beauty side. Focus on the beauty division. That's all my advice. But yeah, let me see what guys are saying about the Jacquemus fragrance. The Jacquemus perfume will smell like popcorn and desperation, like the clothes. Damn! So harsh. Nah, I'm a fan of Jacquemus from the start. Less so the clothes, but I am a fan of Jacquemus in terms of branding, marketing. As someone that, I do consulting for some brands, I always use Jacquemus as a case study, always. I have so many stats from Jacquemus that I won't show you on the stream because people pay me for that. But yeah, I always use it as a case study. So that's why I'm a big fan of it, just following the business side of it. It's so good. They do such good business. Such good business. Leah says they're not going to listen to you. They're too far gone. This is also true, by the way. Corporate people don't last long enough to plan long term. If they don't grow, they get fired ASAP. But that's more of an issue with the system, because I understand that a CEO, it's not in their best interest to do long-term decisions, because if they do that, what's going to happen is they're going to lose money in the short term. So the next quarters, they might suffer. And then because they suffer in the next quarters, you have pressure from shareholders like, this CEO does not know what they're doing. We've gone down a few quarters, and then they get fired. So basically what a CEO has done in that situation is you've set up the next CEO at the expense of your own job, which no CEO is obviously going to do. So they're just going to make really bad decisions, but that work in the short term. And that's why I always say the system is broken. Companies need to stop thinking about business in that way. And also shareholders need to have a better understanding of the fashion industry to understand that sometimes decisions have to be made where you suffer in the short term, but in the long term you win. And that's how you change the system, because everyone would make money that way if they thought that way. That's why CEO is such a scam job. You know, it has a shelf life, so you collect the money you can. Yeah, for sure. For sure, for sure. But yeah, that's my conversation around the Jacquemus fragrance and why I think it will work, and why I also think that it's a really good decision that he has decided to go with L'Oreal. I think he's going to do really well. And me being a fragrance head, I won't consider myself a fragrance head that much, but I do, enjoy fragrances and I collect fragrances. I do have a big fragrance collection. So I will be testing out the Jacquemus fragrances when they come out, and I'll let you guys know if I like them or not. So yeah, but the next topic, we are talking about the Trump tariffs, which of course politically has been a massive conversation in fashion. Because now let's go to the part where doesn't people ask, why are you talking about politics? Yeah. I don't know why people get so annoyed with me when I talk about politics, when politics literally affect the fashion industry. Like, it literally affects the industry. I don't know why people want to be like oblivious to politics. It literally affects you. Yes, you watching. It affects you. You are not immune to decisions that politicians make. You might think you are. You might live in La La Land, hairy, fairy, scary world. But that's not, reality, guys. Everything that Trump is doing right now is going to affect all of us. And I work in the fashion industry, and it is very much affecting the fashion industry. So I will continue talking about politics, whether you like it or not, because it affects the fashion business. And this is one of the things that we are going to be talking about. So yes, Trump's tariffs are really going to have a really strong effect on the fashion industry. So we're going to skip to this point where essentially they've already talked about the fact that Trump is enacting 25% tariffs on Mexican and Canadian imports. He also has tariffs on, Chinese imports. And this, first of all, is going to decimate a lot of retailers. Now, the reason why this is so important to consider is we need to think of retailers in Canada, retailers in other regions of the world, where clothing is even produced. A lot of companies, like fashion brands, where they produce their clothing. And if Trump is putting tariffs on these companies, because overnight it's going to be twice as expensive for them to produce what they produced before, right? So it's very, very, very important. Now, when it comes to things like Canada and the 25% tariffs on Canadian imports, think of the likes of Essence, right? Essence is one of the best retailers in fashion. I love Essence. I think that their buyers are always on the money. I think their buyers always know what they're doing. I love what Essence does in terms of, the articles that they do. They have really good writing on the platform, really great imagery. They have the right commissions. I just love the way that Essence functions. Now, if for Essence, which is based in Canada, and they have, limited infrastructure in the US. Obviously, because of what's going on with Trump, they're probably going to have to be forced into building that infrastructure in the US. But in the short term, it's really going to affect them. Because I think their warehouse is in Canada. They have some stuff in the US, but it's mainly in Canada. It's really going to affect them if consumers, and one of their biggest markets is the US, which is their neighbor, and all of a sudden it's way more expensive. So people start buying, stuff from different retailers where they can get stuff, cheaper. So it might really, really affect companies like Essence, and we do not want to see Essence go. Essence is one of the best retailers in fashion. I do not want to see Essence having serious financial issues. I don't want to see them folding. I do not want to see that. Yeah, Kayo is even saying they ship from Canada. So they are in trouble with these tariffs, right? They were the first people that came to mind when I thought about, all these tariffs. So it's just like, what does this mean for retailers in the markets that Trump is enacting these tariffs in? And also something that they mentioned in a BOF article that I thought was really interesting. They said, while the Trump administration is using its unpredictability to press trade partners for concessions, it's creating major hurdles for retailers. Without knowing which goods will be affected, from which countries, and for how long, it's hard to make key decisions, such as whether to relocate production or raise prices in stores. The biggest questions are still on the table, said Susan Scafidi, professor of fashion law at Fordham University and founder of the Fashion Law Institute. If this is a negotiation tactic, fashion houses will bite the bullet to take a small short-term loss and likely not pass anything on to consumers. Investors are betting the tariffs are here for the long haul. US stock indices fell on Monday morning, though they recovered over the course of the day after a steep initial drop. Brands with production concentrated in China and Mexico, ranging from the cosmetics line Elf to Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger owner PVH, and the Western wear seller Boot Barn, were hit the hardest. So once again, you have companies where most of their production, like Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger, is in China and Mexico. So they either have to go to different markets and start producing, I don't know, in Vietnam or just different countries, and they have to, jump ship so they aren't affected by the tariffs. But it affects the companies because it's very expensive when you have favorable contracts with, companies and retailers in different countries, and you have favorable contracts with factories because you're in a 10-year deal. So they've given you like a really good rate to produce all your garments. And now all of a sudden you have to renegotiate these deals in different countries where you don't operate before. And it's hard to get the same offers because you don't have the same relationship that you had with the factories where you've been producing for 10 plus years, right? So for bigger companies, obviously it won't hit them as hard, but think of how painful this will be for smaller companies, more independent brands that produce in the likes of Mexico and China. It's really, really going to affect their business and really going to affect the way that they operate moving forward. Of course, it's not going to affect everyone. Certain companies, and I've talked about this before, but some conglomerates have started to see China as too expensive of a labor market. They're saying that the labor is getting too expensive in China. So lots of them have jumped ship already and have started producing in places like Cambodia, for example, that has an even cheaper labor market than the likes of China. So it won't affect everyone, but it will affect a lot of people. And I like how on BOF, they had these like 4 charts to kind of show how it would change. So we're going to go through the charts, like what it would affect. So the first chart is about where the US gets its clothing from, which of course is very important because if you're putting tariffs from China and, most of the clothing is coming from China, how does that really affect the economy? So you can see on the graph that imports from China has been reducing with time. If you look at like on the left-hand side, that red line there is the imports from China. And it starts from 2013, right? And at the end, you can see it's way lower. It's below 20. It's like around that sort of like 17-ish mark, whereas it was on 30 in 2013. And you can see imports from other regions increasing. Like you can see a steep increase in imports from Vietnam. You can see an increase in imports from Bangladesh, right? So as much as, yes, it might affect companies in the long term, you can see that, the US has already been moving to relying less on imports from China. Like it's slowly been declining with a very sharp decline in 2020. So it seems like, oh my God, the whole economy in the US is going to fall on its knees. But they've kind of already slowly and gradually been moving to, less and less imports from China anyway. But let's see what they say in the article. Since 2019, since I said 19 like a Latina. Since 2019, global fashion companies have already taken steps in diversifying their supply chains to be less dependent on China, exactly, which we just mentioned. According to the US International Trade Commission, the share of apparel imports from China fell from 37.7% to 21.3% between 2013 and 2023. And that makes a lot of sense because I think that the US has basically been in a trade war with China anyway. So they have politically, over the course of a few years, have been making steps to rely less and less on China because they are trying to, go away from relying on China so much, right? So that makes so much sense. Footwear brand Stephen Madden, for instance, told analysts in November that it has been developing factories in alternative countries like Cambodia and Vietnam. Exactly. So I just mentioned this move away from Chinese markets to the likes of Cambodia and Vietnam because it's seen as a place that has an even cheaper labor market than China. And so that's why a lot of companies are going there. But anyway, reading on. Its goal for 2025 is to reduce the percentage of goods sourced from China by 40%. For now, it is one of the most exposed to Trump's tariffs. According to the UBS analysis, shares fell nearly 7% on Monday. However, the inclusion of Mexico in Trump's latest wave of tariffs complicates things for retailers exploring nearshoring options. Then the next graph, which is very interesting, talks about the brands that are most vulnerable to these tariffs based on where they produce. So you can see tariffs would raise costs on products sold in the US. And you can see that Canada Goose is one of the brands that's really, really affected. You can also see like Steve Madden, Boot Barn, Stitch Fix. You can see a lot of the companies there that are affected. And these are really, really big, even Crocs. These are really big companies. So this will obviously have a big knock-on effect on fashion because you need to remember, and a lot of people don't realize this, but fashion has an ecosystem around it. It's the companies that make the money, that provides the job for the people that make these products and the factories that produce these products. And if anything folds, a whole factory might close down. Like a whole factory that might specialize in a certain thing. If 5 big companies that are their clients fold, the whole factory folds, and now we just have no factory in the industry that specializes in that specific way of making things because it doesn't make sense for them to, financially survive. So it's not good for these kind of things to happen. Look, transitioning away from reliance on your main geopolitical competitor is one thing, and it shouldn't be done the way it was, to be clear. But what the fuck does Canada have to do with it? So I watched some video where Trump was explaining why exactly he wants to put imports on Canada. And, should I go into this? I won't go into it, but you can literally find, like, Trump had a whole press conference where he explained exactly why Canada is ungrateful for what the US has allowed them to import and export and blah, blah, blah. I won't go into it, but you can literally find it on YouTube. I won't go into it, actually. I decided not to. But going into this chart, it says retailers' exposure to the tariffs will differ based on how much of their goods are sourced from China, Mexico, and Canada. So, of course, they published on the list which brands are affected. Not every brand will be able to pass these costs onto the consumer. According to Siegel, only those with strong brand equity can raise prices without hurting sales. And that's very true because we've seen when the likes of, Burberry tried to increase their prices at crazy rates and how that affected who was buying it. So, yeah, moving on. Those without must figure out a way to absorb the tariffs by eliminating expenses elsewhere or figure out ways to share the impact with supply partners. Typically, dates and details around the implementation of tariffs, including how different classifications of products, knit versus woven for instance, are published when the tariffs are announced. So we're going to see when they are announced properly, with all the details in the tariffs, what that really affects in what categories, because it's not always the complete same, right? So we'll see. US imports more than it exports, so from their perspective, it actually makes sense and kind of fair to restore the trading balance. Yeah, also, financially, I don't think so. I think that one of the big reasons that Trump has mentioned why he's enacting these tariffs on these big markets is because it forces people to buy American. It forces, if it becomes too expensive to import, it might force you into producing locally. It might force you into starting your own infrastructure within the company. Like, see how I said with Essence, for example, if this really affects them, depending on what their infrastructure is like in the US, they might have to invest more in warehouses in the US so they can ship directly from the US to US consumers and no longer from Canada, right? And if that happens, basically Trump has won, because Trump has forced Essence into investing infrastructure in the US and spending money in the US, right? Which is what he's doing. That's what he's trying to do. So it doesn't always work out that way. Like, sometimes when you impose big tariffs on different countries, it backfires, and it doesn't actually benefit the companies because everyone suffers, because so many companies can't just move to producing locally that quickly, and in the meantime they make so little money and they lose so much money that they cease to exist. So the long-term play doesn't become a long-term play and companies just suffer. So it depends how they do it, and that's why I'm following it, to see exactly how they enact these things, because it doesn't always work out perfectly the way that some people think. Yeah, Trump is enacting all these tariffs, people are going to buy American. It doesn't always work that way. It doesn't always work that way. Like, it doesn't always perfectly transition that way. Greedy American CEOs are never going to pay American wages for labor. Like, that just isn't happening. Yeah, that was the conversation that we were having around Elon Musk, because Elon, even though Elon has been a big part of the Trump campaign and has been talking about, we need to get the immigrants out and all that sort of stuff, but Elon is one of the people that takes advantage the most of undocumented workers and takes advantage of the fact that he can pay them less and the fact that, it's a cheaper labor market. So I find it, strange that on one end, he's kind of like shouting, yeah, we need to get the immigrants out. But behind the scenes, he's hiring as many undocumented workers as possible. It's such a big contradiction, right? And so once again, this whole, they're going to impose tariffs and they're going to block who can come into the country and all that stuff, like, it's just not realistic, which is why I want to see exactly how they're going to do it from a business perspective, because, it's not going to work unless, the only way it can work is if Trump gives massive companies an exemption and they don't have to pay the same tariffs that smaller companies do. That's the only way I can see it working. And he's probably going to do that, because I can imagine that someone mentioned it, like with Tesla, that Elon operates most of Tesla in China. Exactly. So if they are imposing these tariffs, there's no way that Trump is going to allow that to affect Elon, because Elon funded a lot of his campaign. So there has to be a workaround some way. And I'm watching closely to see how exactly they're going to exploit that workaround. I'm really curious to see. The next chart is about the inflation and how prices have increased and decreased over time based on inflation. So once again, it says, an increase in cost of goods will ultimately result in higher prices. Inflation has cooled since its peak in 2022, but has crept up again in recent 9 months, falling short of the Federal Reserve's target of 2% year on year. In December, the 12-month percentage rate for inflation, excluding food and energy, exceeded 3%, not seasonally adjusted. Once the tariffs go into effect, inflation will be exacerbated, analysts say. So, Trump puts these tariffs in. Once they are enacted, inflation goes up, everything is more expensive. So this is what I mean when I say that it sounds good. Companies are going to be forced to investing in the US. But do these people think that consumers are just going to overnight be willing to pay double or triple the cost of goods? Like, are consumers going to be willing to stomach that cost just so that they can buy American, support American? Like, people are already struggling. Like, people are struggling financially already. So it's just not realistic. It just really isn't realistic. But we'll see if it works or not. We'll see if it works. And then the fourth chart is the e-commerce shakeup, and talking about how a trade provision has been allowed for sites like Shein and Temu to garner major market share in recent years by shipping low-cost items directly to US consumers without facing tariffs. And this is what I mean, because some companies can exploit loopholes, which means that they don't, have to suffer the same tariff costs that other companies do. So you can literally see how these imports have increased based on, so you had 410 million shipments to the US, and then it's increased to 1,360 in 2024. So it's basically more than triple the size from 2018 to 2024 in terms of goods imported from Shein and Temu, which is absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. But anyway, reading on. Global e-commerce exports from China have grown tenfold over the past 5 years, according to the US Congressional Research Service. In 2023, exports of low-value single packages from China, serviced by sites like Temu and Shein, reached $66 billion. This was made possible by a policy known as de minimis exemption. In 2016, Congress raised the threshold for duty-free exemption from $200 to $800, which fueled the barrage of packages shipped directly from China into the US. Combined transactions from Temu, operated by parent company Pinduoduo, and Shein make up 70% of the discount market in the US, according to the Congressional Research Service. Now, let's pause there before I continue speaking. They cannot afford to lose out on a lot of that money. The US cannot afford to lose out on a lot of that money, which is why, as much as, Trump has been talking about these tariffs, I'm looking closely to see exactly how big companies are going to exploit it and what loopholes, like I've been saying, because there is no way that they aren't going to give big companies like, it's not possible, because the company will lose the country, the US will lose way too much money for them to afford to alienate these kind of companies. It's just not financially, economically, it's just not possible. And so that's why I do find it funny online when I see people talking about, oh yes, Trump is sticking it to China and all this. I'm like, do you guys look at any business reports, or do you guys know how much of the economy or how much the US relies on Chinese companies? Like, do you guys actually look at this stuff? Like, the way they're like, yeah, he's sticking it to the foreigners. It's like, actually read a financial report. And exactly, they only care about their companies. But even either way, these companies operate in the US. Like, some of the biggest multinational conglomerates are all based in the US. So because they are the people that fund these political campaigns, there's no way that they would allow Trump to just enact these tariffs and it affects them. They're not going to allow that to happen. They won't allow that to happen. So that's why I'm just, looking closely. I'm seeing, okay, it's cool. I'm looking at these tariffs, but all I want to know is, how does this affect Tesla? And how does this affect the big luxury conglomerates? Yeah, this is facts, by the way. This is facts. This is big facts. Wait, someone said, the issue is Trump's voters don't care. Oh yeah, look at how quick LVMH got their Texas plant up. I remember that. It was really fast, wasn't it? Super fast. Super, super fast. And it's funny because I remember around the time when they made that plant in Texas and Trump was at the forefront talking about, yeah, we're going to create so-and-so jobs. It was funny because I can imagine most of the people that work in those kind of places are undocumented workers, um, or like at least immigrant workers for sure. A lot of the kind of immigrant workers that Trump is moving to deport now. And so I wonder how that's going to affect the industries once again, because the people that do these kind of jobs are the kind of people that they're sending out. And I don't know why it's so hard for people to understand the economics of how these things work. Like most immigrants, especially immigrants from poorer countries, they normally do the jobs that citizens from that country are not willing to do. So I can use the UK as a good case study. When Brexit happened and a lot of people left and were forced out, in the grocery stores, there was literally no food because the truck drivers were normally the people that got sent away. And so there were no truck drivers because British people don't want to do jobs like truck driving. Because, they're like, no, I don't want to do that job. So we just had no truck drivers. And then they had to double the wages of truck drivers in the short term just so that we could have food to eat. Just so that, trucks could be driven to the grocery stores to actually deliver food in the grocery stores. So I think I don't know why it's hard for people to fathom that, these people keep the economy running. They keep the economy turning. So I'm also looking from a luxury standpoint, because of this will affect the luxury industry, because it's like who works in the factories, who works in, these different establishments that are hired by these luxury fashion conglomerates. And if they aren't around, who's going to do the job? So very important conversation to have, to be honest. But let's read. It says, this means domestic competitors such as Walmart and Amazon, as well as brick and mortar discounters like Dollar Tree, will benefit with market share gains. So that's, Amazon and Walmart will benefit if these tariffs that are placed on the likes of Shein and Temu actually affect them and there's no loophole. That is true. That is definitely true. Shein has a competitive advantage because it's on-demand model and not the de minimis rules, Shein executive Donald Tang told BF in September. The efficiency and wide choice we provide gives the company not just a few points advantage, but a significant advantage. We are about to find out if that's true. So yeah, essentially, that's the conversation around how Trump's tariffs can end up affecting the fashion industry. It could lead to a lot of people losing their jobs. It could lead to, especially a lot of fashion retailers folding if they can't, reestablish their warehouses and their audience and their shipping infrastructure quickly enough and base it in the US, or if they can even afford to do that, by the way, because that's another conversation, depending on how big the retailers are. So yeah, it stands to affect and really shift the state of fashion, especially luxury fashion, as far as America is concerned. Someone says, I think you're severely underestimate how bad the conditions are. We don't underestimate it at all. I think we know exactly how bad the conditions are. I mean, I cover all the time, for example, in places like Italy, and people think that made in Italy is some amazing thing. But if you look at the working conditions and the people that work there, it's horrible to work there. Like, we read that story in Reuters where people were living on bunk beds crammed into rooms with barely any ventilation. So, that's why. Of course, they're not great, but that's why I say like US citizens don't want to do those jobs because of the working conditions. So the only people that can do the jobs are people that, don't really have a choice. Like, they don't really have a lot of options, which is why like a lot of immigrant workers end up in those kind of roles, right? What does Anglerfish say? I am talking to people saying Americans that work on retail would prefer working there. Oh yeah. What people need to stop overthinking this shit because Trump and his dumb administration really do mean dumb. Certainly don't think too hard about this. There's no grand strategy. No, I think that what Trump is doing, because I mean, Trump is not a smart business person, because if he was, all his businesses wouldn't be folding all the time. So he's clearly not that good of a businessman. Like, if we're being honest, what Trump is doing is he's doing what people want him to do, because he's trying to lobby political power. and use that political power for his own personal gain. So when it comes to Trump, like he's seen as different and people love him because, yeah, kind of like political theater. This is exactly what it is. People love him because so many politicians, in fact, almost every politician, every time they make promises, they never actually follow through on the promises. So this, so with Trump these days, like especially with him since he's been in office, which is not that long, he has basically delivered on every promise. Like literally, he's like, I said we're going to get the immigrants out. Here's me signing executive orders, pushing them out. You know, I said I'm going to do this. Here's me doing this. So I think his supporters love it because they're like, finally, Trump does what he says and da da da. But that's all political theater to me. That is all kind of, he's just doing things to appease his audience, but those people are not going to actually look at what's happening behind the scenes and the business deals that he's making with big conglomerates and the loopholes that he's creating, so that when he does the front facing things, like when he does the things about, oh, we're going to get the immigrants out, when he does the things about, oh, we're putting tariffs on China because I said we're going to have a war on China, his supporters will not see the shady stuff that he does behind the scenes that allows these Chinese companies to still export to the US and not pay the same tariffs. They won't see how, you know, these companies will still be able to use undocumented workers and illegal immigrants and even like immigrant workers also. And, you know, those workers won't be the ones that are deported because they are working for specific protected companies that, you know, have some political influence over Trump. They won't see that sort of stuff. So that's the issue I have with politics. And that's why politics really annoys me, because politicians, a lot of times, they have these like everyday talking points and they make these decisions that, you know, people that don't see the bigger picture or look further will just be like, yeah, Trump said he's going to do this and he did it. But not seeing how that actually affects the country economically or how that affects the everyday person, right? So yeah, it's crazy. Al says current PC word is undocumented, not illegal. So the thing is though, like even the situation, like how it works, because Trump has changed some of the rules. I'll give you guys a story, but Trump has changed some of the rules on immigration that will actually affect the US. I'll give you guys a very like anecdotal story, but it's kind of what's happening. So I have two passports, right? I have a British passport and a Nigerian passport. So if I go to West Africa, I don't need a visa because I have a Nigerian passport. And then when I return to the UK, I can return to the UK on my British passport, right? So I don't pay visa anywhere, going anywhere. So most people that have dual citizenship do that. So if you're an American citizen and a Nigerian citizen, and I know a lot of people like that, if you go to Nigeria, you would go to Nigeria with your Nigerian passport, and then you would go back to the US with your American passport. So you don't pay any visa, no paperwork, happy days. Now, because Trump recently changed the laws, I'm now seeing a lot of stories, especially on like Nigerian Twitter and stuff like this, where people have done what they've always done their whole lives. And they've gone to like an African country with their African passport. And upon returning to the US on their US passport, they're not allowed to enter anymore because they're like, well, the law stipulates that you're actually supposed to leave the US on the same passport that you return with. So if you leave the US, even whether you're an American citizen or not, if you leave the US with your other citizenship, and then you come back with that citizenship, you have to go through the paperwork to immigrate back. So you're not allowed in the country. You have to go through the process like everyone else. So people that are literally American citizens, born in the US, American citizens, like have companies in the US, and some people I know personally have been affected like this. They have not been allowed to go back into the country. And these are people that pay taxes, they contribute to the economy. So once again, this whole like crack down on immigrants and immigration, it's I hate the rhetoric around it because it's dumb, it's stupid. It's actually stupid. So yeah, that's another reason why, once again, like it's going to affect everyday US citizens. Just watch. Give it like 2 years. Give it 2 years. People will be begging for people to immigrate to the country. Give it like a good 2 years. And that's the crazy thing. That's the crazy thing about it. The whole country runs on undocumented labor. The only reason food gets made and menial jobs get to be done. Yeah. Yeah, facts. I mean, it's just like Nigeria. Like, I can't enter Nigeria with my UK passport. Otherwise, I'd have to pay for like a visa, and the paperwork is crazy. And getting a visa to Nigeria, good luck. If you guys have been to the Nigerian embassy in London, it's the worst place you've ever been to in your life. It's a horrible place to go to. And you're going to be there all day. Like if you want to get your passport renewed or, anything done, to be honest, you're going to be there all day. All day. It doesn't make sense to leave with one passport, because if I went to Nigeria with my Nigerian passport and then came back with the same passport, I wouldn't be allowed to enter unless I had a visa to enter the UK. So that doesn't make sense. I always have to leave with 2 passports. The only time that I travel with 1 passport is if I'm going to anywhere that isn't West Africa, which is most places. And I just travel with my British passport to avoid complications. So if I go to because with a British passport, you don't need a visa to go to any European country for the most part. And a lot of Commonwealth countries. And I mean, I don't need a visa to go to the US, but I always have to get like an ESTA, which lasts for 2 years. So no, if you're going to Nigeria, you can't just leave with 1 passport. You won't be allowed back in the country. You won't be allowed back in the country, literally. Can you not exit the country with a British passport and enter Nigeria with a Nigerian passport? No. So do people not, like, when you're at customs, like when you get to customs at the airport, if they ask you where are you traveling to, and then you say Nigeria, then if you give them your British passport, they're going to open your passport to look for a visa or to look for documentation that means that you can travel to Nigeria, for example. This is how it is in any country. So if they open my British passport, they don't see a visa, they're then going to pose a question. Do you have a visa to travel to Nigeria? At which point I will be like, oh, I have a Nigerian passport. And then it's the Nigerian passport that they register with my flight, because that's what they're using as proof that I have the legal right to enter the country. You know what I mean? So you actually cannot use a British passport to enter Nigeria unless you specifically have a visa on the British passport to go to Nigeria. And that's how it is in every country. Like, that's very simple, like travel, citizenship, immigration. That's how it works. That's just how it works in every country, by the way. That's how it works. Just pay the same money, wait the amount of time to get the correct permissions like everybody else. I don't know what you mean. Because if you have in this case, I'm talking about America. If you have an American passport and you have an American citizenship, you're not supposed to be stopped by customs because you have an American citizenship and you use the American passport to go back, because same reason on the way back. So say I had an American passport and I was in Nigeria. When I'm at customs, they're like, oh, where are you traveling to? The US. Okay. Now they're looking for the legal documentation that gives me the right to go to the US. So in that case, you use the American. Do people not know how like traveling works? Or like how immigration? I feel like some of you don't know how it actually works. This is quite basic, you know. Have you guys like not been at the airport? That's how customs works, you know. Maybe because some of you might not be dual citizens, so you don't know how it works if you have 2 passports. But this is very basic. I don't even know why I'm explaining this. This is extremely basic. Like any passport you have, it doesn't matter. You go to the you enter customs, and the customs officer looks for how you have the legal right to travel where you're going. Simple. That's how immigration works. Maybe this is why in the US, because I know a lot of people in the US don't like travel a lot. So maybe that's why there's a general sentiment around like immigration and emigrate, because people don't even know how it works. Like people genuinely don't know how it works. Not someone saying, so we ate Mr. Worldwide. Elle says, nah, a lot of people haven't left their own countries before. Maybe that's actually why. Because I'm like, why do I have to explain this? This is like really basic. It's like really simple. Look up the percentage of how many Americans hold passports. You know what? Let me actually Google this. How many Americans own a passport? I'm like, this is quite basic. Okay, so apparently it's AI overview, so I don't know how accurate it is. I'm going to need to find a different article, but apparently 48% of Americans have a passport. Damn. So like, this is also true. Like, America is so big and diverse, we don't really need to travel abroad. Yeah, that's a big reason why I think maybe a lot of like Americans don't really understand how like visa works, or like how you travel, or like how these things work, which is why like in the US there's a general sentiment about, because I've seen some of the rhetoric I've seen online, people are calling people illegal immigrants that aren't even illegal immigrants, because they don't even know like different kinds of visas, how you get these visas, how these visas actually work. Like, I've seen situations where I'm like, am I missing something? This person came to the US illegally on a visa, and I've seen people be like, I've literally seen on Twitter, let me tell you something I literally saw that I was like, what the hell? I saw on Twitter where there was this story about a British citizen who was in the US on a visa, and I think their partner was being deported because there was something wrong with their visa. And I saw a lot of people being like, deport them. They aren't citizens, so they don't have a right to be here. And I'm like, wait, these people don't understand that if you have a visa, you're legally in a country. They think you have to only be a citizen. They think the only way that you can legally stay in a country is via citizenship. So people think that the only people that are legally staying in countries are citizens of that country. I was like, damn, these people's understanding on like immigration and stuff is really, like really, really low, like extremely low. Like, their comprehension on these issues is like extremely low. Let me see if we can find a stat. Okay, 48% of Americans have a passport. Let's see. This article says, is it true that only 10% of Americans have passports? That's not true, apparently. That's like a big myth. So if people think it's only 10% of Americans that have passports, it's not true. It's apparently that was true in 1994, but the figure is now 40%, and it grows every year. This actually reminds me that my passport expires this April. This is also true. This is why you have to know the laws in your own country, because in some countries you're actually not allowed to have a dual citizenship. So it depends also. Some countries you can't have two. In the UK you can, and literally I have to declare my other citizenship. So when I had my British passport renewed recently, and I had to send them all my other passports from every other country for them to renew my British passport. Like, that's part of the process, and you can't lie about those things or you'll get into serious trouble. So yeah, you're allowed. Let me actually Google how many passports can you have as a British citizen. I know you can have like at least two, but I think I know some people that have like three. Okay, as a British citizen, you can have as many passports as you want. This is because the UK does not limit the number of citizenships a person can hold. There we go. So where I am in the UK, you can have as many passports as you want. But certain countries, you're only allowed to have one. Some countries, you're only allowed to have two. Every country has different rules. You just have to know how the immigration works in a specific region, in a specific country. Not all the laws are the same. Not all the laws are the same. But just the British passport alone is really strong, because there's so many countries you can travel to without a visa. Let me Google it. How many countries can I travel to? So as of 2025, UK passport holders can travel visa-free to 190 countries. That's insane. 190 countries without a visa. It's actually insane. Part of it obviously is because British people are shady and they conquered the world and pillaged the whole world. So they kind of have a lot of political power over a lot of countries. So that's part of the reason why. Even though it's some tiny ass island. But yeah, it's weird. It's weird. Wait, there's an entire program set up to bring babies here to the US to get citizenship. Anchor Babies, Lebanon's one program from... Okay, so that definitely is a thing, like where people have children in the US to gain like citizenship via their kids. That's definitely a thing. And I'm not sure if they're cracking down on that, but I think last time I checked, they are. They definitely are. They definitely are. I was about to say the worst empire in human history. Facts, though. Facts. I mean, I'm Nigerian, so I know all too well about the effects of the British Empire on other people. Like, I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of the British domination. So, yeah. Is birthright citizenship still a thing in the US? I don't know. I don't know that much about the US. I have to Google that. But I know in some places it is. I remember in Ireland, when Brexit happened in the UK, I remember in Ireland, they had that birthright thing. So if you could prove your birthright to Ireland, so many people were like, yep, time to get my Irish passport so I can have an EU passport. So certain countries still have it. But yeah, I don't really know about the US though. Siobhan says, yeah, that's one of the goals. It's gotten way out of control. Yeah, you mean in terms of like the people using kids to get citizenship? Yeah. Yeah. I think, and that's the thing about immigration and conversations about immigration, because obviously it's always like a touchy subject. I think in some cases it makes sense. Like if like, you know, in terms of like the child thing where people are just like going specifically to have their children born somewhere to like get citizenship, but there's no, what's the word? Like you're not contributing to the economy in any way or to society. That's like a bit of an issue. But in terms of like people like Trump changing the rules, actual citizens who have businesses there, they pay taxes, and then stopping them from entering just because you change the rule randomly. And by the way, I don't think like all these people that I'm saying are dual citizens and have been denied entry back to the US. They're going to like sue and they're going to win. I know for a fact they're going to win, but it's going to cost them time. They're losing money in the interim because their businesses, I don't know how they're running it from wherever they are. It's going to cost them a lot of emotional strain. It's just unnecessary because they're still going to be allowed entry into the country, like legally at some point. They're just going to have to go through a process that doesn't make sense and that didn't exist before Trump was in office. And also there was no like grace period to allow for people that left before Trump entered office to still be allowed to come in based on the rules that remained. They just changed it overnight and then that was it. So that's the thing. So on some things that they're doing, you can see the positives there. And a lot of things that they are doing, there are big issues there, like huge issues. Siobhan says, that's a debate. They're looking at it legally right now. The last birthright laws in the US were from the late 1800s, so it needs to be looked at. Damn. Imagine not updating something from the 1800s. That's crazy. That's wild. And this is true too. Undocumented migrants pay more in taxes and receive nothing in return. They subsidize legal Americans. It's just dumb how little people know about their own country. Yeah, facts. And that's what I mean. Like, anyone that contributes to an economy is a net positive to an economy. So even undocumented workers, right? Even like and I hate it when they call, in America, they have terminology, like they say like aliens, they use words like aliens and stuff, which is just crazy. But even undocumented workers, if they like could prove that they are a net positive to the economy financially, like a lot of their work is leading to like taxes being paid and like all these things and like building the GDP of the economy of the US, which is the case for a lot of them, I don't know why they aren't granted a stay in the US, because those are people that are actually contributing. And that's why I think it's strange that those are the people that they're trying to crack down on, because it's just going to affect the economy. Like, you're going to have people that then aren't in those jobs at all, because the people that were there have been sent away. And even going back to the trade deals, so when I've been studying these tariffs, some of what Trump is doing is he's using the tariffs as leverage, as political leverage against certain countries. So let's use Colombia, for example. So Colombia is a country that Trump said he's going to put tariffs on. And he said he'll make the tariffs less, or he'll reduce the tariffs if they just accept the undocumented immigrants that they send to Colombia. So they're like, if you leave your doors open for us to send you these immigrants that we don't want, then we'll give you better trade deals, basically, is what he's done. So he's using it as leverage with different countries and different regions. And there's a difference between immigrants and illegals, though. All you need to do is get your papers, man. Do it right. No, it's not that simple. It's not that simple. It's not that simple. It's not that simple. Yes, there's obviously a difference. Like, immigration is just the act of moving from a country to another. You can do that legally or illegally. And if you're a legal immigrant, obviously you're not going to have any issues, because if you have the right paperwork, then there's not going to be any issue there. Now, if you're an illegal immigrant, you overstayed your visa, whatever, legally, by legal standards, you shouldn't be allowed to stay in the country, because that's just what the law stipulates. However, I think that exemptions should be made for people doing jobs, even if they are legal, even though technically it's not legal, because legally, if you don't have the right paperwork, you're not supposed to be allowed into a country. However, if you want your economy to keep working, there's certain workers that do things that are so vital to the American economy and keeps the thing running, that sending them away, even if they're illegal, could really decimate the country. But I can understand from a legal standpoint why they would still send those kind of people away. But yeah, some of these people can't afford to do the paperwork. So even if they wanted to come back legally, they can't afford it, and they just will never come back. And then so there'll not be workers doing these jobs that keeps the US economy running, like keeps day to day. And I think this is what people struggle with, because, okay, Siobhan says she works in the law. Actually, let me not assume your gender. Siobhan says they work in the legal practice. So you working in law, I understand why you're talking about it from a legal standpoint. But I generally always think economically, if I'm thinking economically, if you're an illegal immigrant, if I was like running the country, if I was a politician, I would never be. But if I was a politician, if you're in a country illegally, obviously you wouldn't be allowed to stay. But I would give an exemption for people doing very specific jobs that like are so vital to keeping the country running. Otherwise, we'll just suffer. People in the country will suffer, and then it will just make things worse. But basically, you could do what Trump does. Like, Trump does the whole Trump does the whole like theater thing where he'll sign like an executive order and like sign it in front of everyone and start celebrating and stuff. And and be like, yeah, we're sending these workers out, but behind the scenes, he probably still does what I'm saying. He probably has an exemption for certain workers that work for companies of his friends, like Tesla. I'm very sure there's an exemption there. We just don't know about it. It's in the fine print. I need to read the whole Constitution front to back and read every law, and then I might find the fine print in there. Siobhan says, I'm a female, thank you. Yeah, okay, cool. I didn't want, because Siobhan is a very typically female name, but hey, I don't want to assume your gender. I don't want to force it onto you. Okay, Siobhan says, it definitely needs work. I don't disagree with that point. Yeah, exactly. That's the standpoint I'm coming from. But That's the problem. Because see, look at the nuanced conversation we're having around immigration and economics. Whereas when I turn on Twitter and I turn on anything, or even when I like watch some speech that Trump has or a press conference by Trump and I read the comments, it's like, do these people actually know like how immigration works or how economics works? Like everyone is always like, get the immigrants out, and there's just no conversation around. And people have gone so far, even people that are in America legally, going back to what I was saying earlier, because they're not citizens, people think that you have to be a citizen to, like, there's genuinely people that don't know that you can live for an extended period of time in the US without ever being a citizen. Like you can literally just have a work visa, and renew it over and over and over again to the point where you could literally be in the US for 20 years and never be a citizen and legally be there. Like people don't even know that. That's like insane. Because like even I've talked about this, right? That I was considering going to the US for work. Now, if I move to the US, I'm not going to be a citizen, obviously, because you have to go through a whole process to be a citizen in the US. I would be there legally via a work visa. But people don't even know that those things, they don't even know about visas. I'm like, damn. So the conversations around these kind of topics are always so lackluster and lacking any sort of understanding about the way things actually work. And that's why I don't like to, once I watch those kind of press conferences or I open Twitter, I have to turn it off. Because I don't want like people that, you know, don't really have any clue about how things actually work to influence the way I think about things. Yeah, like Siobhan is saying, it's quickly hostile and uninformed, for sure. But it's really cool you work in a legal sense. What side of law do you work in? Do you work in like immigration law and stuff like that? Because if you do, then that's like you would be very knowledgeable about all this sort of stuff. But obviously, law is very vast. You could be working in all types of different sides of the legal industry. You're dealing with people from small towns who have no understanding of the rest of the world. Yeah, probably that. But I think also the US is a very, and it's funny because we've turned this into like a political chat. But anyway, the US is a very unique country because it's so big. Like in the UK, you have to like it's just kind of impossible to not know anything about any country because the UK is a tiny island. And even within the UK, there's so many countries, right? You think of like Scotland, Wales, England. So just already, we're already aware of like different countries around us. And then you can take a train to France. So almost like loads of people in the UK have been to France. Even the most working class people would have been on like 2 or 3 holidays in their life and they went to France on holiday. So it's very difficult for UK people to not have a passport. It's really odd for people from the UK to not have a passport. So therefore they would understand immigration, customs to a certain standpoint. So that's why when I have these kind of conversations, it's really weird seeing like the average like American on social media, how they relate to these topics, because once again, the US is so big, you kind of have everything in that one country. You have so many states, like 50 different places with 50 different laws and 50 different, like it's crazy. Different tax rates in different places, different VATs, different, like it's just so big and it's so vast. You can basically call it like countries within a country anyway. And so that's why people, you know, never really have to contend with these kind of things. And it's why they're not very educated around these kind of topics. Siobhan said, I shouldn't say really, but I'm interested in international law and copyright, specifically for fashion, but also other areas. Oh, that's amazing. Shout out to you, Siobhan. And Siobhan said she's surprised that people even know her name. Maybe because I grew up in a European country. Because Siobhan is quite a common name in these parts. In these parts. What do people call you? CO Barn. CO Barn? That's a really cool name. CO Barn. CO Barn. Immigration lawyers are of awful quality. There's so much stuff they provide in terms of services that can be solved with a Google search. Yeah. Also, someone said, is it Rob D, I think? As a Brit-born US citizen, it's not too complicated to become a citizen. Yeah, that's from the UK, though. So I'm lucky that I have a UK citizenship and a UK passport and whatever, and I was born in the UK. So certain regions, like when you, and I know this because I've been through the process of like immigrating to the US, so I know how it works. Like I have a good understanding of how it works. And I was going to go on an O1 visa. And the process is actually quite straightforward and quite simple. But I just haven't finished the process because I'm not even sure if I want to go to the US or not. But anyway, they prioritize people coming from certain regions over others. So if you're coming from the UK, it's easier for you to immigrate to the US than people from like many other regions. And they make it easier for you to become a citizen because the UK is seen as like a higher net worth like region, so people coming from there will be less likely to, you know, not pay taxes and not contribute to society and all that sort of stuff. It's just how they see it, how the system works. Can Europe fit into America? I'm not sure. I'd have to Google that. Probably. I mean, no, because I mean, if we count Russia, like then no. But if you remove like Russia, maybe, because Europe is tiny. Like Europe, the countries in Europe are really, really small. Like they're already tiny. Like England, Ireland, Wales, Scotland, France, Italy, Germany, the tiny ass countries compared to the US. Like all tiny. Liechtenstein, like tiny ass countries, right? England could be an American state. Do you want to know something funny? The whole of the UK, I think, is smaller than California. Let me actually Google it. Is California bigger than the UK? Let's have a look. Yeah, so California, which obviously is one state in the US, is literally bigger than the whole United Kingdom. So you're talking about England. California is bigger than the whole United Kingdom. So the whole United Kingdom could be one American state. Literally. Literally. So that's how big the US is. So I understand it. Like when we have these conversations, contextually, I can understand why the everyday person's conversation around immigration won't be that useful in a country full of people that don't have no experience with immigrating to any country or emigrating from a country or any of that stuff, right? There's a YouTube video of Brits reacting to the size of the US. Don't come to the US right now. We are a mess. Every day a new Trump drama. Yeah, that's why I'm reconsidering. That's why, because before Trump went into office, I was strongly considering moving to the US. But now it's like, and I mean, I'm from the UK. It's not going to be super hard to immigrate to the US. So I'm not in any particular like rush. When I decide I want to go, I will get the right paperwork and move. It's not that hard from my perspective. So yeah, for now, I put that on pause. My US move is on pause. Why is he typing in all caps? My caps lock is on, that's why. Like England is the size of Texas. Is it? I feel like Texas is bigger. Is Texas bigger? Let's see. In all caps. I feel like Texas is bigger. Yes, Texas is larger. Yeah, I'm like, look at how big. Like, Texas is more than 5 times the size of England. I'm like, Texas is a huge state. There's no way England could be the size of Texas. I was like, let me Google that because Texas is massive. Why come to the US? Because the UK economy is horrible right now. And with the work that I do, there would be better opportunities in the US. But I've made the executive decision not to move to the US right now because I like a work-life balance and I don't like stress. And yes, would I make more money in the US? Yes. However, the stress of dealing with all the Trump stuff, I'm like, I'll give it a pass. I'll wait 4 years. I'll wait 4 years. Danielle says it takes 24 hours, I think, to drive from one side of Texas to the other. Because, yeah, when I think of Texas, Texas has those massive ass like Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, Houston. Like, these are big ass cities. Like, Texas is enormous. That place is huge. That place is so huge. When I feel like Americans also, because I was in LA not too long ago, and I feel like Americans have a weird concept of what a short drive is. Like, Americans will tell me, oh yeah, it wasn't even a long drive. I just drove 3 hours from this place to this place. And I'm like, 3 hours? What? Some people will be like, yeah, my daily commute is like a 2-hour drive. A 2-hour drive to work. That's insane. But I think maybe when you've grown up in the US, you're used to driving long distances like that. The UK is too small to be like, oh yeah, I drove from this side of the state to the other and it took 24 hours. Like that, that place is way too big. Way, way too big. I feel like if I lived in the US, I'll just be flying everywhere. So long as the flights aren't too expensive, because I don't know how expensive domestic flights are in the US. But in the UK, like for people that don't know, if you're based in the US and maybe you haven't traveled to Europe before, traveling between European countries is dirt cheap. Like I could get a flight to Paris right now for £40. I could get a flight. In fact, I've done it before. I've gone to Milan Fashion Week and paid like £40 for a flight to Italy. So traveling within European countries is so dirt cheap. You can just fly anywhere. It's actually more expensive to take the Eurostar, like the train, than it is to take a plane anywhere in Europe. So I don't know if it's like that in the US, but if it's like affordable in the US, I would just fly everywhere. I'm literally not driving 15 hours to go to a different state. I'm not doing any of that. Like, I'm just not doing that. Okay, people are saying the European airlines are absurdly cheap compared to the US. Maybe that's what it is. Domestic flights are horrible interstate. If you can sit for 3 hours without being antsy, God bless. Wait, someone said, Mandem, the flight's not worth it. Okay, people are saying the flights are expensive. Maybe that's why people drive those long distances then. So yeah. It's cheaper to fly from London to California than it was to go from one Cali city to another Cali city. Really? How do they justify those prices? Maybe because I guess in the US, like more things are privatized. So they just set whatever price they want. Wait, just because you don't fly from London City, the airport fees are crazy. I mean, I fly from all over the place. You can do a domestic flight from so many airports in London, whether that's London City Airport, from Gatwick, from Heathrow, from London Luton. I've taken a flight to Italy from London Luton before. Yeah, you could take it from anywhere, to be honest. Be quiet and drive far. Shut up and drive. Shut up and drive. People are going on trains instead because they can fit they can fit more passengers on and deal with less hassle. Unfortunately, the US doesn't have a great high-speed service. Yeah, so even though taking the train is more expensive in Europe. The reason why sometimes I still take the train is because when you do those like flights between different European countries, your weight limit, like your baggage limit, is really low. And it's really expensive if you start paying for excess baggage. And then it becomes more expensive than the cost of the train ticket. So if you're going somewhere short term and you don't need to take a lot of stuff with you, then definitely the taking a plane will be way cheaper. But if you're planning on doing any form of shopping, then take the train. It'll be cost effective overall because on the train there's no like weight limit. So I just stuff my suitcases with crazy stuff. So that's why, like, when I go to Italy, for example, I don't go to Italy that often anymore. But when I do go, I buy a lot of stuff when I go to Italy. I buy my balsamic vinegar and my extra virgin olive oil and all that sort of stuff when I'm in Italy. So that stuff weighs a lot, right? So I stuff that in my suitcase. I might buy some fashion pieces. I might buy some fragrances. And if I take a flight, the amount it would cost in baggage, it just doesn't make sense. I'll just get the Eurostar instead. I mean, in Italy, it's a bit different because Italy is a bit far from the UK. If you take a train to Italy, it will take forever. Like, it would take a very long time. You'd have to like get the Eurostar to France and then get a train to here, and it'll take forever. So it's more likely that you fly to Italy. But if you're going to like France, take the Eurostar. If you're going to Belgium, take the Eurostar. If you're going to the Netherlands, take the Eurostar. These streams are so gold because this conversation is still about fashion. Yeah, because it's still like I just talked about like shopping, for example, and stuff like that, right? So yeah. Are you going to do a review of Calvin Klein? Yeah, so many people have asked me this in the Discord. Yes, I will be talking about Veronica Leone's Calvin Klein debut. That's coming in a few days. So stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for it. Stay tuned for it. But anyway, thank you very much, guys, for tuning in. People were saying that I was speed running the stream. No, I was not. This stream has been going on for more than 2 hours. But yeah, if you guys have Spotify subscriptions, you can check out my live streams. You can always watch them back via Spotify. If you guys don't have your notification bell on, please turn it on so you're notified when I switch on these streams. Please follow me on Twitch. And if you want to support the channel, then you can subscribe to the Patreon. The link will be in the description. But on that note, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. And I'll see you when I see you.